Next level. Next level.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Aspen City Council work session for November 13th, 2023. On our agenda tonight is one item, the Armory programming update. And Jen, you'll be presenting this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, or this afternoon, we have a review of the Armory Hall. And I've got two teams remotely, so I'm going to do some introductions first. Again, my name's Jen Phelan. I'm with the Asset Department. Remotely, we have Cushing Terrell here. That's an architectural firm, and Design Workshop, which did some work for us also. This afternoon, we'd like to talk about the Armory and we'd like to talk about the Armory, the outreach we've done so far, the progress we've made on this project for a remodel and reuse to bring it back to a community use. As part of that, we've done some market research. We've also done some test fits for the building, and we'll be looking for direction from council this afternoon with regard to the extent of the remodel of the building and prioritization of the uses. First, since I am working remotely with some teams, I'm wondering if Cushing Terrell is going to pull up the PowerPoint presentation we have, or should I do that? Megan, I think you have the ability to pull that up and share.
Yeah, let me see if I can share my screen here and we can share that presentation. Okay.
All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so I did talk about this. We're looking to find out the extent of the remodel of the Armory into a community use and prioritize the use and program mix. What we'll be covering today is a quick overview of what we've done so far, the test fits and what that showed, the market research, and then coming back to you to get some feedback on what you'd like to see for next steps. Can we go to the next slide? All right. Some great classic photos of the building. Next slide, please. All right, so past efforts. I think this really first started about in 2015 with an advisory vote. The ask was whether the Armory should be a community use center or city offices. By a slim margin, it was voted to be community use. That's what prevailed. In 2018, there was another vote because we were looking at a one roof solution, and it was looking at developing a city hall at this location that we're in tonight, or a collection of spaces off of East Hopkins Ave. Again, the vote results was that the city hall should move to the site we're at today. We really started talking about the Armory in earnest in 2022 when we were getting ready to move out of the Armory Hall. And since February of 2022, we've had 7 meetings with council on the remodel and reuse of the building. We've had 2 engagement initiatives. In 2022, we did 2 Aspen community voice surveys. We did 1 open house and 2 focus groups. And then in 2023, we have done 1 open house and an additional building tour, as well as an Aspen community voice survey. Next slide, please. And so just a quick synopsis of where we've been and what we've heard. With the 2 surveys in 2022, we had 418 participants. The initial survey kind of drilled down on what community feedback we could get on guiding principles for the project, the community needs that were identified by participants, preferences for uses in the building, and some questions on investment and remodeling program. Back in last year, There was casual dining, multi-purpose space, nonprofit services, lower price point retail, and co-working ranked the highest in the initial survey. We did a follow-up survey to drill down on that initial information to try and get greater clarity. And the results of that were pretty similar, changed a little bit ranking. And so casual dining ranked first, then community center, which was an added use that we heard from the first round of outreach, multi-purpose space, nonprofit services, and lower price point retail. So similar results, slightly different. With the open house and 2 focus groups, we had between 50 and 60 participants. And of the dot voting that went on, the priority was for casual dining, lower price point retail, multi-purpose space, community center, and nonprofit services. And some of the themes from the focus groups was really, let's serve as many in the general community as possible, and that flexibility with the building is essential, both for design and operation. Next slide. And so as part of this, we developed some guiding principles that were actually memorialized via resolution for this project. And these were adopted in 2022. What they're really geared to do is provide ideas for the basis of decision-making and kind of keep the guardrails on the project as you move forward. You know, I think there's some things such as the Armory being able to be used by a diverse range of people, that the uses should provide meaningful and affordable participation, and that it should contribute to a lively and diverse downtown, and that it should meet the focus on unmet needs within the community are principles that I think the public supports. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cushing Terrell. So the team that's remote is Megan Cranston, who is driving the slide presentation. We also have Randy Rhodes here and Laura Doherty, who will be taking the lead on going over this program. Just a little bit about the test fit. We hired Cushing Terrell to look at what could fit in. So people are saying, we'd like food, or we'd like community uses, or a place to hang out. Well, they all have front of house and back of house needs. They're going to have circulation needs. They'll have storage needs depending on the use. And so what we wanted to look at was like a high level, what can fit in the building, so that you have a better idea of what could potentially happen. And so we'll go through how we went through 3 concepts and what that looks like. Laura, you're
Great. Yes. Thanks, Jen. That was a good tee up. And that's right. Our task was one of fit. Can we fit the desired program? Megan, can you give me the next slide, please? Can we fit the desired program shown here into the Armory? And so secondary questions from that is, how much space do these programmatic elements require? How can those elements fit together within the building, and where should they go within the building? And we considered each of those questions and sought input on the mix of uses that include food and beverage, commercial interior type uses, retail, from our deep bench of designers. So backing us up, we're not here today. We brought our multidiscipline design team together. Got input from Kevin Stewart, our director of our food and beverage design studio, with more than 20 years of experience, as well as Jill Lee, our senior interior designer, bringing another 20 years of experience primarily in workplace and retail design. Can you give me the next slide? Each use was considered relative to its optimal adjacency and position within the building. But that building analysis was a critical part of this assessment as well. So looking at the available square footage within the Armory and understanding that it has specific characteristics. As you can imagine, not all 3 floors are created equally, with different proximities to the ground floor and activation, and we evaluated what uses are best accommodated where. Again, there was a lot of discussion around the first floor, retail, food, a visitor center, all want foot traffic and that activation. So ultimately, it does become a question of prioritization. Next slide, please. Our test fit assumed that somewhere in between, regarding the extent of the remodel to the Armory, previous evaluations came up with the light touch version that assumed all current floors would be kept, really limiting the usage of the square footage given how low the head heights are today, lower than code minimums at points, as that first bullet point indicates. The opposite end of that spectrum was titled The Works, and that assumed a significant excavation to increase the square footage in the basement, as well as a potential addition along the alley side. And lastly, the somewhere in between approach, which is the one we took, assumed the removal of that non-historic second floor, as indicated there in the section. You can see those head heights. So removing that second floor to really help add to the flexibility of uses to accommodate a wider variety of uses on that ground floor, as well as the desirability of occupying the first floor of the Armory, in lieu of contemplating an addition out in the alley. That allows us to maintain the alley for deliveries, as well as locating mechanical equipment, which will be intensive for food service related uses. So this was a big consideration. Next slide, please. So ultimately, that removal of the second floor is key to the overall success of repurposing the Armory building for these specific uses. And assuming the footprint then that's associated with somewhere in between, this is what we're looking at. And we fit the various programs within this space. And we approach the square footage from a usable standpoint. So what the numbers you see here may look slightly smaller than what you're accustomed to, but this means we subtracted out core elements like stairs and elevator and mechanical space to use this to make our plan. And we're going to show several options for how these programs fit within this remodel contemplated for the Armory. Adjacencies between programs are important, understanding those complementary uses, such as a non-monetized flex space or a flex type space, which you'll hear more about later in the presentation, that could easily support a monetized use, such as retail or the food service location. Location within the building is an important factor. Again, the occupation of that top floor is a very different type of space than is the ground floor or the basement, and the kind of directly connecting, communicating spaces between first floor and first floor and basement is important. So all of these things came into consideration of our analysis. So with that, Megan, I'm going to let you go ahead and get into the detail.
Okay, so here we go. Again, these categories should look familiar to you. These were what were identified in the 2022 outreach. So we have the food and market hall serving as our lower cost food and retail, the community serving spaces, including a community lounge and the flexible space, typical office spaces. So for example, we included a co-working space and offices for ACRA. So all of these space ranges are typical in our modern day offices. Within the food hall, we took into consideration front and back of house needs and different operational methods, which I'll dive into a little bit on the next slide. Also wanted to include beverage only options, for example, a coffee counter or bar. We're using a standard occupancy of 15 or one person for every 15 square feet, so we can assume how much seating we can fit within the space, and also a couple different options for retail sizes within the space. As Laura mentioned, looking at community serving spaces, a community lounge, which was really thought of and a lot of people at the outreach talked about having a third space. So that space between home and work that you can come and hang out and gather and meet your friends. So again, this would be a non-monetized space within the building, sort of like the living room for Aspen, place to come and hang out. And then we've also included flexible multi-purpose spaces, which could be used as an extension of some of the program in the building. So maybe group seating for the food hall, or event space, meeting space, things like that, that could either be reserved or rented. Again, some of the prescribed program we received for ACRA was 1,000 square feet for a visitor center and approximately 1,500 square feet for an office space. One thing that we included to help kind of pull this all together was a circulation factor of 30%. And what that means is that we're accounting for walls and corridors and shafts and all of those spaces in between when this actually starts to get built out. So just a couple of things we had to take into consideration for food halls. As a part of our research, which the report will come out after this after the council session, we looked at several different precedents, really looking at spaces that lived within sort of historic districts, very walkable neighborhoods, had a vibe that really was community driven, so not just food, but also community programming. And within those precedents, if we were just to divide the space equally by the amount of food hall space, we came across about 1,000 to 1,400 square feet per vendor. So if we're just going to do some napkin math, and if we were devoting the full basement and first floor to food hall, we could approximate between 4 to 5 vendors on the main floor and 2 to 3 in the basement level. We did not consider the top floor in this for the food hall, just because we had some program requirements, for example, like the flex spaces and office spaces that needed to live sort of independently from the rest of the program. So really optimizing those spaces, the first floor and basement, that have that connection to the public realm for this food hall program. One of the key decisions that will need to be made eventually is if you want to have a single operator or multiple operator food hall. And basically what that means is the space required is either shared or individual by the food vendor. So for example, in a single operator food hall, it's mostly managed by a restaurant group or a head chef with multiple different food concepts or market concepts, and they utilize shared resources like a shared kitchen, shared storage, things like that. And a lot of the operational scheduling and things like that is pretty much dealt with through your single restaurant group vendor. The other option is to look at a multiple vendor or multiple operator situations where you have, multiple individual tenants with their own space needs, their own storage needs, their own kitchen needs. So it's a slightly different space requirements for each. Some, for example, multiple operators may require more individual storage, where the single operator can do shared storage. Also, it's assumed that in multiple operator situations, some of the prep work and storage work is done offsite. So that does impact the space needs for those two different operational methods. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get into the test fit. So what you'll be seeing is 3 options, all of which were presented during the open house and on the survey. We're going to take it from a very high level here. So each set will have 3 slides. It'll have an overview slide, which is very similar to what was presented during the outreach. Then we'll look at the first floor at a higher detail, and then move into the top and basement levels to look at each one of these differently. So the first food hall that we're looking at is the multiple operator food hall. And essentially what we're assuming is that the kitchen space is attached to the front of house space, and that there are 2 individual kitchens within this space. This does allow for us to have 2 vendors with a coffee counter, seating for up to 80 within that space, some retail space. It includes the visitor center on the first floor, some flexibles, and also some flexible space. So looking at this a little deeper, we go into the detail here. Looking at the first floor, just this is a sort of a standard methodology for where we've put these in the building. So looking at just where the building sits on the site and some of the adjacencies. So the north wall of the building is adjacent to the alleyway, and there's also a 0-step entry there. So that makes this back wall sort of a prime space to put some of the back of house, food hall, service areas. It's adjacent to the mechanical yard. We can enclose some of those spaces without really losing any natural light because there are not a lot of windows on that side of the building, and then also on the east side as well. And as we look at the Galena side of the building and the Hopkins side, that's really where those public spaces interact with the building. You can look through the windows and you can see active spaces. That's where we want to put seating, have some more of those lively spaces. So as someone's walking down the street, they can look in and say, hey, what's in there? Also looking at activating not just the Galena entry as it is now, but then also improving the Hopkins Street side to have another entry that we can maybe activate different times of the day. For example, we can have the coffee shop on one side of the building, and then we can have sort of the late night dining on the other side of the building. And again, that sort of makes the corner right here sort of the prime hub. So we want to put that real public facing space, that community space sitting right at the corner. And as we move forward, you'll also see a mezzanine level. On that mezzanine in this view, we have the community lounge, which is again sort of that Aspen's living room space. We wanted it to be adjacent to the food hall, again, adjacent to that public space to have sort of that active feel, that welcoming feel. And this flex space we've positioned here, again, this will really function more as a reservable space, something that could be utilized for group seating. It could be utilized for small concerts, small events, things like that, rather than a more private, quieter, enclosed space outside of this lively hall. So looking at the upper floor, we've put the ACRA offices up on the 3rd floor. The reason again for that is that that can be really enclosed and secure from the rest of the building, adjacent to some flexible spaces. So these flex spaces may operate a little bit differently than those on the 1st floor. Again, they can be more secure and enclosed. And also these would be more of those rentable spaces, so low cost rental spaces for like classes, workshops, rehearsal space, things like that. So again, they can sort of be separated from sort of that lively, noisier space on the main floor. And then also if ACRA had additional events, they could move out into that space and utilize some of those flexible spaces. In the basement of this option, we've included a standalone restaurant. And one of the advantages of that small space in the basement is it does have access to exterior stairs, and also some natural light there with the stairwell coming down. So there could be a restaurant there that again could be sort of independent from the food hall or support the food hall. It could be completely enclosed, or we can sort of push that food hall vibe into that lower level with some retail space adjacent to that restaurant. And again, utilizing some of that floor level for that reservable space that really supports some small group dining, some small group meeting space that's a little bit more informal. Okay, so the next option here is the single operator food hall. And again, it's not strikingly different except for the needs for, say, a shared kitchen that's a little bit larger than what we'll be seeing in that multiple operator food hall. We've moved a few things around. We've put the community lounge right there in that hub right at the corner, that visual hub, and then moved the visitor center onto the lower level. So again, on the 1st floor here, we're seeing a slightly different size needs for that single operator food hall with a larger kitchen. One of the advantages here is that the food stalls aren't necessarily adjacent and attached to that kitchen. So there's more flexibility on where they can be placed within the floor. Again, we also have a coffee option in this one with seating and a few little retail pockets. Again, that community lounge is sitting at a nice hub right at the Galena Street entry with some flexible space on the mezzanine level. Again, that could be more of that reservable space, but since it is separated from the food hall, you could actually secure that as a rentable space as well. Or it could be a nice fun place to have like musicians come perform for the people while they're having their lunch. Okay, and so on the top floor, again, we're seeing the ACRA offices adjacent to a co-working space. And a co-working space is different than a flexible space because there's walls and furniture and placement for those things. So different options like enclosed offices versus hoteling stations. And this option actually has a shared kitchenette, break room, and wellness room, whereas in the previous version, all of those were enclosed within the ACRA space. So looking at this as a way of potentially reducing the footprint of ACRA a little bit because we are including some of those shared resources. On the basement level, we've moved the visitor center. An advantage here, again, is if the visitor center is operating different hours than the food hall, it can be opened and closed a little bit independently of that food hall because of that entry. Again, we have some complementary retail spaces at the lower level. Again, this could be an extension of the food hall, or it could be complementary retail to the visitor center, like Aspen only type arts and items. Again, this flex space here could be enclosed or again, supplemental to the food hall space or the visitor center space. And lastly, this is a little bit of a hybrid, and this is where we chose to make some tough decisions about maybe what can stay and what can go. So in this version, you'll notice that there are no office spaces in the building. We've prioritized really those community serving spaces, the food hall, the community lounge, and the flex space, with still including the visitor center on that main floor in the bit of the hub space. We've expanded the food options in this to include 2 vendors, a coffee shop, and a bar, and 2 additional food vendors in the basement. So again, you can see here, it's basically an iteration of our option 1, but including more food and beverage on that main floor, having a slightly larger community lounge in the mezzanine, but then still remaining with that flexible space to support the other program on that floor. Again, here looking at how we can sort of think about the entries of this building, different times of the day, placing that bar in the rear of the building, you can activate that rear entry versus the Galena entry to be more of the daytime programming with the visitor center on that side of the building. Again, here on the top floor, we've made this completely flex space. And so what this means is that you could have one really large flexible space, or we can break this up into smaller spaces depending on community need. There's definitely an opportunity to have a banquet hall here with the kitchen spaces below, and also those community serving spaces like for meetings and nonprofit groups and things like that, to have low cost meeting spaces available to the community. Basement, again, we have a slightly hybrid model here. We've included a shared kitchen with 2 food stalls, so a little bit of that single multi-operator separation here, seating, and then also some retail in the lower level. You'll notice throughout all we've included updated restroom space and also significant building storage. Having any sort of food service with multiple vendors will require a significant amount of storage. So we didn't want to leave that one out. And last but not least, we have the icing on the cake. These are the outdoor spaces. So one of the advantages this building has is it's in a really lively area, and we have this wonderful little park next door. So outside of being the community living room, it could also be the community front yard. So around the building, we also have a great opportunity to activate the outdoor areas by including additional seating, maybe doing some upgrades to Connor Park that include some additional tables and benches, maybe some Adirondack chairs. We also tested this concept with the open house and with the survey, and people were very excited about the idea of alley activations, including art installations, seating, pop-up events, even the addition of some additional food options and food trucks, and then using Connor Park to bring in community events, supplement some of those the markets that are existing in the area, potentially, thinking about a winter market. So just with some small park improvements, all of this is definitely possible and could really bring the whole corner into that really visually public space by activating these outdoor areas and really making it welcoming. And with that, I will hand it over to Design Workshop.
All right. And hang on one second there. Council members, questions at this time? Anything you want to share at this time, Sam?
I just wanted to ask, and I think I know the answer. All the little like fit testing and the things that you listed are all obviously adjustable. It's just like a sort of like a placeholder suggestion for a lot of how it goes. I just want to make that clear.
Correct.
Yeah.
What we're trying to get out tonight is what are the priority of uses. I wouldn't even necessarily say, we have to say where they have to be, but really get an idea of what you think is most important to be in the building.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that.
At this time? Yeah.
I'd like to suggest we skip the market study section and move straight to survey results. I think we all know our market well enough and read what was in the packet.
Other council members, do you want to see more in depth of this? Would you like a quicker overview of the market study?
I think for the public, it'd be good to have an overview of it.
I could go for a quicker one.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, we've been provided with this in our packet, but other members of the public haven't, and this is a very public-facing project. So let's go through the market study as quickly as we can, perhaps. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be introducing from Design Workshop Eric Krongold, and he was the driving force behind this study. It had both qualitative and quantitative data, and as he, I'm sure, just heard, let's hit on the high points.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate the introduction. So we'll move through this pretty quickly. I think some notable things to take away from the demographics. Two big points here. The daytime population of Aspen nearly doubles during the day. There's an enormous commuting workforce. And I think when we look at that from a market perspective, that's additional folks coming to town that are looking for some of the options that we're talking about the Armory, particularly around food service. The other thing of note here that I think is rather important is just from Aspen's evening population, about half of that is within a 15-minute walk of the Armory building. And there's a lot of folks who can quickly come over there, grab something, and head home. So I think we just have very favorable both location and as well as commuting workforce that could work in our favor. Next slide, please. So the market in Aspen from a retail, and when I say retail, I really mean kind of your traditional goods and services, retail and restaurant space is very strong. Asking rent outpaces market rent, and current rental rates are about $96 per square foot, and whatever space comes into the market, it's quickly leased. We looked at all of the retailers within Aspen and the types of goods that they were selling and services. And what we found is the market is really dominated by your higher end brands, heavy influence of health and wellness and personal services. What's not there is kind of your daily goods, your smaller retail categories like family apparel, home goods, things like if I need to buy a t-shirt, for a reasonable price, I'm going to have a relatively challenging time to find an option in Aspen. The other thing that we found is just looking for options around third spaces in the community are relatively limited. When I say a third space, I mean a space that really isn't home, really isn't work. It's that kind of flexible space that you can go for low or no cost and gather with folks very informally. And what we found in just an environment like Aspen where real estate is typically monetized in one way, shape, in one way or another, those spaces don't really exist. Next slide, please. With the interest around food service, we felt it was important to do a deeper dive into just what the food service market was like in Aspen. We identified 61 providers, and we did a whole analysis around what types of price points their offerings are at. And what we found is that there really are few lower cost options, and those options particularly drop off around dinner time hours. So folks have relatively limited options for dining out if they want to go out to dinner. Of the options that are available during dinner time hours, even fewer are what we'd call full service restaurants where you can sit down and be waited on. On the topic of third space, again, really limited low to no cost meeting space. We did find that there was a significant amount of nonprofit space within Aspen, though did identify it as a lower opportunity just due to the lack of foot traffic that they can generate. Next slide, please. So we did just a basic analysis around putting a methodology for our recommendations in terms of what is the highest and best use. And We looked at the uses in our study really within 6 different categories. So their ability to generate revenue, their ability to drive foot traffic, the ability of them to market to support them, how much time we anticipate folks would spend within the building, the risk associated with it in terms of vacancy, and then the intensity of that development, how much building modification would be required. Flexible gathering space scored the highest in our analysis, followed by a full service restaurant, quick service food options, retail, some type of a maker's market, food hall, and then nonprofit space scoring the lowest. Next slide, please. So in terms of our recommendations, I think there's absolutely an opportunity to address the lack of lower price point food options within the Armory building. I think a full service restaurant is likely less riskier with maybe 1 or 2 fast casual options to support it. I think a food hall is certainly possible, though there are, as I think Cushing Terrell noted, challenges that come with that around operations, as well as space fitting, and also certainly challenges around foot traffic, just making sure there's enough folks coming in the building that can support, 8 vendors within that space. We think retail is also a very viable option within the Armory building. We believe it should be focused towards more community serving style retail, your basic goods that could be sold here, as well as an opportunity for local artists or artisans to sell goods to the community. Next slide. Above all, we think this is a phenomenal space for kind of your flex space, that third space that I spoke of, the space in between where if I'm not at work or home, I can come and meet my friend for a quick cup of coffee and just sit down. It really becomes, as Cushing Terrell noted, that living room of the community. Finally, for nonprofits, we recognize they serve a very important function within the community. They tend not to drive the foot traffic that may be required in this building, but also don't necessarily have the broader appeal that I think other options that we looked at do to the community.
Thank you, Eric. Next slide, please. So I talked about, we started out in 22 doing some initial engagement, a couple different ways to do that. We started to do more of a deep dive in 2023, still high level of what could actually fit in the building based on that community outreach and engagement. Did a market analysis, again, to try and see, even though, people want all sorts of different things, what might work best and have the best chance of success in the building. And we also brought the test fits to the public and did some more engagement. And so we did an additional questionnaire that copied the information that we asked at the open house. And the use preferences for just ranking for an individual use was food hall with multiple vendors was the highest ranked use. Retail sales spaces went next, community lounge, rentable flexible spaces, and a visitor center. And then talking about the different options that were shown at the in the survey and at the open house, the 2-level food hall, which was option 1, was the highest ranked in that it had food service on both the basement and the ground floor. It had the visitor center on the first floor. Upper uses were flex and Acra offices. But it was clear that food is definitely the main interest of the public. And we also had that open house. We had great attendance. It was, I'd say, between 150 and 200 attendees. And again, the food hall concept received 41% of the votes, while restaurant bar received 9%. So you're seeing that kind of grouping, that use being basically 50% of the results of that open house. Visitor center received 14% of the votes. Community lounge received 11%, and then flexible, I'm sorry, could you go to the next slide? The flexible thank you. Flexible multi-purpose spaces, co-working spaces, offices, that rounded out those uses. So again, food was definitely the highest choice of the public. We did also talk about the exterior and the park, and some of the improvements, as Cushing Terrell mentioned, additional seating was definitely, people wanted to see that in the site. They'd like to see better lighting and improved landscaping. And so there's opportunities with the park to be respectful of the intention for the park as it was donated to the community, but also improve it so that it works better with the Armory in the next phase of the Armory's life. Could you do the next slide, please? All right, and the next one. So next steps. What we're here for tonight is to get some council direction. We'd like to know the preferred extent of the remodel. Essentially, in the past, we've had direction that council was interested in landing somewhere in the middle, which had a price tag of 18 to 23 million as a total investment. That, at the time, looked at removing the second story and potentially adding an alley addition with a ground floor and basement. As part of this, I asked for updated cost estimates for this idea and added the test fit concepts to look at that also. And so generally speaking, the proposed design options run from 15 to 22 million. So you're in the ballpark for the main Armory building. If you build an addition, you're going to be looking at, and we assumed basically 2,500 square feet per floor, so 5,000 square feet. You're looking at 5.5 to 7.5 million. That would start putting you out of the range that council was interested in originally. Another thing to consider if you're thinking about the addition is there is a fair amount of mechanical along the alley. If you do food in that building, it will need mechanical, and so there could be some competing interests of building infrastructure and then the cost. So there were 3 questions. The first questions that we'll be looking for direction tonight is, should the second story be removed from the building? And as we move forward, would you like us to look at considering an addition to the building during schematic design as we move forward? So those are 2 questions we'd like you to answer tonight. And then if you go to the next slide, the third question that we'd like, which I think probably will be taking most of this evening's discussion, is we'd like some ranking of the uses. So I think we have an idea of different uses can fit in the building. We'd like to see how council would rank those uses so that as we move forward in the design, we can prioritize what goes into the building. Because again, we could put a little bit of everything in it and it might not be as successful as if we prioritize certain uses. So if we have actually just ranked uses, I think that helps us move forward knowing what is most important to the community to fill that building with. And I know you're going to have some questions, so we're here to answer them, and we've got people here in the audience too.
Thank you. Council, do you have any clarifying questions at this time?
Yeah, obviously this selection was called Next Steps, and I was curious, I feel like it's been said that we're going to need a master lease operator, we're going to need a public-private partnership. Where does that come into play in this timeline?
Do you want me to take it? Do you?
Well, obviously, per your direction, whatever your direction is, our next step is review proponents for an RFP
So we have the RFP out. It closes December 4th. It was written somewhat broadly because we're trying to be responsive to council and move this forward in the timeline that they're hoping for. And so the RFP is geared towards what we think the city would be delivering would be a core and shell building, because different tenants will want different finishes and different their different expectations of the building. As part of that RFP, we are asking for an operations study so that we can actually come back to you with good information early on the best way to run this building, the costs associated with it. And so if you are wanting to get started, we did include in the RFP a caveat that the city could be going out for a public-private partnership to be looking at potential operator for the building, towards schematic, probably going out as soon as I guess you want us to, but definitely by, closer to schematic being done.
And I don't know if you would say, does the city suggest that? Like, in my head, I'm trying to think what's logical, and it seems logical to me that we'd get a master lease operator, a private partnership, as soon as possible.
What's your intentions with getting the lease? What are your expectations of that master leasee? Are you expecting them to fund, for example, are you expecting them to fund the capital, or are you going to turn capital dollars over to that other party? The community, this is a beloved building in this community, and I hear a lot of feedback about not losing the city's control of it on behalf of the community. And so I don't want to have any chance of value engineering that's not in the best interest of that building. And I view that as the primary purpose before the use in it. And that's consistent with the direction I've been given the last 2 years.
No, and I completely understand that, but does it necessarily have to be that way? Can you get that private partnership without losing that control? Can you get that master lease operator, since we'll probably need one eventually, without losing that control?
I think there are different ways that you can do it. I think you need an informed conversation of the pros and cons on that, because I don't think the council's educated on it.
Yeah.
This council, the last council spent time on it. And that this, the direction we've been given thus far is to deliver this project as quickly as possible. And we think that includes the city oversight of the core and shell renovations and getting it to a place to turn over to a master leasee to finalize from there.
And
Yeah, I guess my comment on it is just like, once again, I agree with the corn shell, having the city fund the renovations, but I just want to make sure whoever we're partnered with, like, we go in the direction that makes sense for everyone involved, so that it's not just done quickly, it's done right, because, that's...
I guess that's the part I don't understand, then, if you're expecting a third party to carry the capital costs. Because when I look at that versus the affordability you're trying to put into the space, they don't match up. And so the city needs to, in my opinion, underwrite and oversee the capital improvements to its asset, and then allow another party to use it. And that's consistent to how most leasing is done by the city. So, for example, at the Red Brick, we don't ask the Red Brick tenants to invest in capital needs of the building that are outside their individual leased space. This would be a consistent practice with that. I also think the council really needs to contemplate what it will cost to run this building. I suspect it's going to be higher than might be expected. And so I think that is an important analysis to really be done, so we all have clarity. And the community has clarity, so they can prioritize the spending decisions. Back to you in their comments.
I appreciate all these answers, and then I looked to the council and said, I'd love that informed discussion sometime sooner rather than later to, go forward in the most appropriate way. So.
Yep.
Yes, I agree that there should be a master lease, but I think that the phase or the point where that master lease should come in is when we've decided on what the building's going to be, and that the city winds up financing the redesign. But in my notes, I had that the extent of design based upon community desires of uses. And my question is, do we go by what is listed as missing in our community. Obviously affordable food, but also family-oriented or retail on the lower end is 2% met. So my question to us all is, do we do what the community outreach says, or do we do what is most needed in the community? And so that would put affordable retail in a higher need for space. But just to read the rest of what I had commented on it to myself as an RFP should also include the proposed relationship between the city and the operator of the Armory. I do not want the city to lose control of the asset, nor do I want to micromanage the selection of tenants, lease rates, collections, or being responsible for construction defects. The developer needs to be the firewall for the city. And I'd like the city, and I think it's what I'm being, I believe, asked to do is try to determine what the uses should be, and then have as much flexibility for somebody to come in and design that. But I like some of these options. I think are a good point. But the master lease, I think, is after we get to that point to find out who's going to operate it.
Thanks. Bill?
Thanks, Jen. Thanks to the Cushing, Terrell, and Design Workshop teams for this start. I have a lot of thoughts on the program elements and the uses that you want some feedback on, Jen, but I want to save those for part 2 of this discussion since we're on, seems to be we're on a conversation about the approach and the direction overall. And firstly, if you don't know this, which I think you do, I'm very passionate about this project and I want this to be really successful for our community. I think that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create sort of a new hub of social life in Aspen, and I think that in doing so, we need to think differently than we have in the past, and I think we need to approach the development of it, the management of it, the operation of it very differently than we have other projects the city has undertaken. Sarah alluded to the way things are done at the Red Brick. I think that if we approach this project in the same way as the Red Brick is operated, it will be a failure. And that's not a criticism of the city or anything that they're currently doing. I just think that this is a highly complex project. It seems like the uses that the community desires based on the outreach and the feedback that you've provided are mostly food related, which are very specialized and not something the city has experience in, nor should it gain the experience in it, in my opinion. I think that would be at great cost. So I want us to approach this differently than we have in the past, and I want this to be successful. I don't think that this council, or any council for that matter, or our staff are the right group to lead this project, or groups to lead this project. I think that we need to identify a partner now, and here's how I propose doing that to ensure that the community retains the control that it desires and ensures that its interests are met. What I would suggest we do is we rescind the RFP for design work immediately, and we put out an RFQ for partners. I think that we can structure the partnership in phases, where phase 1 work could be getting us through schematics and finalizing programmatic elements, and the city could even reimburse the work to our partners so that there's no risk of no capital risk or no significant capital risk on behalf of the partner when they're doing that work. Their sweat equity would certainly be invested, but perhaps the city would own all the work product, and if we didn't like what was happening, we could always say no and terminate after a certain phase. I do think that we should have a work session and explore that arrangement, and I really think that it's critical to the success of this project. We need the flexibility from day one for a partner, an experienced partner, to guide us through the design efforts. For example, if we undertake the core and shell work ourselves and we don't contemplate the need for a specific piece of refrigeration equipment, a certain type of freight elevator, things like that we have zero experience in determining the needs for, and we don't provision for that, doing those things later and unwinding that are really expensive and complicated. I would like to know that information and do that initially. To address several other of Sarah's concerns, yes, the city should be participating financially in this project. I expect that we'll be participating significantly in this project. That doesn't mean we need to lead this project. And that doesn't mean that a partner couldn't also contribute financially to this project. We won't know what that looks like until we explore that with potential partners. So again, I highly encourage us to think differently on this, to identify someone, protect our community's interests, of course, ensure that this project will be operationally, financially, and environmentally sustainable. But we got to do it differently, and continuing down this road of designing the core and shell is a mistake, in my opinion. I'd like to come back to conversations about program elements, though it seems like the community has spoken. But that's my piece on sort of direction, overall direction and approach.
Thank you. John, comments or questions at this time?
No, I'll wait, thanks.
Okay. I want to explore this a little bit more, Bill, and Sarah and Scott. Cart before the horse kind of conversations. I understand that the building direction, for example, an addition on the alley, and Bill, I'm kind of asking you. So when it comes to questions about an addition on the alley, are you saying, don't make a decision about that right now, look for a partner who would suggest that or not, kind of thing?
Yes, I would like to make a decision amongst us tonight on the primary program elements. I think we have the information to do that at this point. Certainly rank them and talk about which ones are musts and which ones are.
We want to get in the building, yeah.
I think we are in a place to do that, and I think we should do that now. I don't think that any of us should be making the decision on whether, at this point, on whether there should be an addition in the alley or not. I think we need someone who's going to tell us, I don't want the city to spend our money on it. I don't want to spend the money on it. I don't know what to do with it, or it's absolutely critical to the operation. I have no idea.
Okay. So then my question about process, the RFP that's out is talking about structurals. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't talk about interior finishes or equipment and the like. So instead of 2 tracks, are there combined tracks here? Is there the opportunity to put the bait in the water that Bill is suggesting that says maybe there's an entity out there, and I don't know. I don't. There's an entity out there that would be interested in this, that has that insight and wants to come discuss that. Is there the opportunity to find that out while we are looking at some of the opportunities? I mean, an RFP doesn't mean that their proposals can't be modified, that their proposals can't be worked with another group. So I'm just wondering, is there a way to merge these processes? Is there a way to get this information at this time? Or are they 2 separate and distinct tracks?
I have a question for you, Jen. Can you give us a couple of bullet points on what the current RFP scope is?
So we wrote it for schematic to construction docks. We are expecting that we would deliver a core and shell product. I'm hoping that we have the skill set with some of the firms that are out there that have experience, depending on how you decide, obviously, tonight, but what we've heard from the public, that they have experience in the areas of potential programming that the community is interested in, and can give us good guidance on what we'd need to be sizing for, say, for example, mechanical, and just generally designing for a building that we can work with an operator to finalize the tenant finish of the individual spaces.
I would argue that the building is what it is. but we don't have the expertise to know what the structure will bear, or does it make sense to, I think we agree we can remove the historic second floor because it was added to the building.
The non-historic, yeah,
Non-historic.
right.
So, my recommendation would be, why not continue with the existing RFP, hire a design team, we're gonna be paying for that anyhow. Let's, and then concurrently, somewhere before we get too far down the road with the design, then do the RFP for a partner, bring them in at the right time, and then we have both teams working on the same problem.
My counterpoint to that would be, who among us should decide where the building loading back of house is going to be? Deciding on where that back of house space is going to be fundamentally affects the architectural and structural design for the building. Where's the freight elevator going to go? Is there going to be a freight elevator? What kind of loading is there going to be? All this should be done from day one, not later. None of us should be making that decision. It's the person who's going to live and die by the operations of this on a daily basis that should be making that decision. It's not going to be me.
And so you nodded when I said, I don't know if these people are out there. That my understanding of what Jen's saying is that the RFP that's out there right now is asking for building specifics with design or operational consideration, right? And so on your side saying, no, there are companies out there that are interested in operating that will also inform the building decisions. Is it possible to put that feeler out? I mean, are you talking about a couple of specific entities or?
Well, I've directed several different groups to Jen that are interested in being long-term operators of this as a food hall primarily. They're the ones that should be directing the architects and engineers, not us. I don't know how to say it more clearly. Maybe I can put it in the context of one of my businesses. If I told an architect and engineer to go design a spec house but gave them no instructions, I don't think it'd be a very good house.
I don't know if that resonates with me as an example. I'm trying to think how to.
I'm doing my best here. Someone's got to guide the team, right? And the city's, in my opinion, not the right person.
Well, once again, so here's the only thing with what you just said that I'm trying to get more information on. What you just said was that the teams that you've directed Jen to are interested in being the long-term operator of a food service primary operation.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I don't know what that means, and I don't know where the other priorities then get incorporated into final design. And so, not my whole concern, but part of my concern is that, a restaurant operator very well could say, you know what? That top floor is going to make the most beautiful dining room. So community space, we're going to actually put that in the basement or whatever it is. You see what I'm saying? It's like I don't know how their direction coincides with community direction, and so I'm. And again, if you hear what I'm saying, I think there's a merger of these two because, to an extent, I agree with you about getting maybe not even an operator. It's not even about an operator. It's just about somebody who has experience in this type of project, in this type of mixed-use building, if you will. That's really what I'm getting to.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree. I think it's critical that we make sure that our uses are incorporated in that operator's work. And I think that that's part of the beauty of this phase one concept that I discussed, where we can say, in the RFQ, we can say, there needs to be X percentage, X square feet dedicated to this use, Y square feet dedicated to this use. And then they can bring something back to us, and we can either approve it or not. And I don't think that the partnership with that partner is finalized until the end of phase one. And so that we get someone who's vesting their time significantly, but we're not on the hook long-term with anybody. I think most people would be open to this idea, and I think it protects our community interest and those specific concerns that you raised.
I'm still trying to think that, these are two chunks of work that should coincide and come together. I just don't know when. Ward, did you have a hand up? Did you want to comment here?
Yeah, I think I heard Bill
Mike?
indicate that Bill wants to incorporate what our outreach and what our community needs have been defined as when we seek a partner. But my question is, do we put unmet community needs? Do we choose what the needs are? I don't know that I'm certainly not capable of saying X number of square feet for this and X number Y square feet for that. And I agree that perhaps the best thing to do on the alley is not make a decision on that until we have some other input as to how the building can best be utilized. But we were asked to prioritize what our wants and needs are for the uses. Would you accept that direction as more or less marching orders, or in the metaphor use a spec home, telling what we want the spec home to do? Do we say we want food at a lower price point, community lounge, flex space, artisan, retail, and then let somebody come up with a design of the building and I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what level of engagement does the city council get involved in the design of the Armory?
Mr. Mayor, perhaps an item that needs to be on the future bike rack in this conversation too is, I've heard the term long-term master leaseholder used, and there probably should be a discussion around what the city can and can't do in those situations, and what have been the historical practices, which have typically been 5 years with a 5-year renewal in these types of situations. And so I just put that out there as a future item you need to discuss, because I believe, in even hearing council comments, that there is perhaps some different interpretations of even length, which would affect participation as a base assumption. That perhaps is where a difference from Councilor Guth and I have, is that consistent direction of after 10 years it goes back out to RFP, which definitely reduces the entrance and an operator of the space and their financial commitment to the space.
Jen, when did you say the RFP process closes?
December 4th.
I've been contacted by a team that has both architecture participants as well as operator participants. I would assume that they may be responding to this initial RFP. So Bill, we are getting some of that interest from those kind of groups. I'm just once again, I'm just trying to marry these two. I don't think it's necessarily possible, but what I'm envisioning is running the RFP process for people that can do building work, but incorporating an RFQ process to get somebody who is a consultant on exactly what you're talking about how does it work? What do you need to make this work if that is missing from the RFP process? So I'm seeing as these coming together, obviously we can't maybe necessarily create or form that team, but I'm trying to figure out how we can get to that.
I think, this is not something that one can quantify very easily, but I do believe it deeply that with a third-party partner leading the charge in the private market, the overall timeline would be compressed versus what we would be able to do, doing the core and shell
Yeah.
ourselves and then bringing them on.
Yeah,
Does that make sense? So,
Yes, that information, I think, if it can run concurrently, would be invaluable,
well,
absolutely.
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the inefficiencies of the city trying to do the core and shell work and design the core and shell work versus finding the partner first and let them handle that work from A to Z would be less time than us trying to parcel it. So I also want this project to move quickly. I also want to do as much work as we can, as quickly as we can. But I think if you zoom out and look at the overall timeline, I think that the efficiencies of the private market would deliver the project faster at the end of the day.
I think we need to decide what we want the building to be used for and then look for partners based on that. And I certainly don't want to sit here at the table and decide where a freight elevator is going to go or if we need a certain size refrigerator. I don't think that was the intent here. I don't want to get involved in that, but I think we need to listen to the community and try to deliver what the community wants and needs, and then find somebody to deliver that and do the final design on it.
Sam?
Yeah, and I would just say that you can't have design without operations. You can't have operations without design. And right now it feels like we're just doing design and missing the operations piece. And that's the very simple logic that I gather from this, where I'm just like, I think we need the operations side in the discussion right now to make sure that the design is good and that everything runs smoothly. It's not cart before the horse. It's just like it takes a whole team to do things right, is just the mentality I see from everything I hear from Bill and everyone else, honestly.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, the RFP does ask for an operations study as basically one of the first things for this team to be doing. It's selecting the right team that has the qualifications that you're looking for. So I wouldn't say it's just architecture and design.
Okay.
And as I was saying, I mean, I've had communications with a team that is that round and that broad. So I think our RFP is moving in the right direction. So before we talk more about Bill's suggestion on the floor, which is rescinding the RFP and creating an RFQ, the RFP only runs until December 4th. I think that there's opportunity for issuing an RFQ to work with that team or to get that information that Bill is looking for incorporated as soon as possible. And that was my question about process. If we get through the RFP, do we have the opportunity to issue the RFQ?
Yes, you do. The other thing is that I think remember, when you issue an RFP and review responses, it doesn't mean you award a contract, right? And I don't say that to scare professionals from responding to it, but any professional who's contemplating bidding on this is listening to this conversation and understanding how important it is they bring operational experience in their team.
Thank you.
We can even issue a supplement to the RFP that states that that is a highly desirable component that would be considered in the evaluation process, if you would like. We're able to make those. We had anticipated after tonight issuing an amendment anyways to clarify whatever direction you are leaning towards on use. So again, doesn't preclude you from doing that. Having expertise in the room is maybe not the same as the individual who will operate the space. And so I want to recognize that difference absolutely exists. Jen and I have looked at a lot of different models about how this can be done. And so we're really interested in hearing from professionals in the design field and who start these facilities. Often they're chefs, and then they end up being partnered with a development partner that bring them forward and see what they think they can do in the space. And I think that's a little different, quite frankly, than making sure that we're protecting the historical resource.
All right. Then, council, the suggestion on the table was to rescind RFP and to issue RFQ. I'm looking around to see if there's support for that process, because that will negate a lot of the conversation that we're about to have if we're not about to have it. I for one, I see us finishing the RFP process December 4th. And then I would love to move to an RFQ to start getting that expertise and brought on board. I don't know that through an RFQ, we have the opportunity to sign a contract for the final operator, but potentially. So right now for me, I'm unmoved on the process. I think December 4th is a close enough date to get the results of our RFP. It can be an amended RFP to incorporate some of the comments that we've heard tonight and the RFQ for operator input. That's where I sit right now. I'll start with Sam, your fingers on the button.
Always. And I just would like to see at least an expansion of operations in the RFP if we don't go to an RFQ, just so that we get that operating partner sooner rather than, that goes through the design process. I think you just need every piece of the team together as we go through this all. So I would look for at least expansion, or if the RFP comes and it doesn't look like it would be successful without the operations side of things, then I think you need to scrap it and almost start over with an RFQ, perhaps.
I would understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Ward?
Yeah, I think we should continue with letting the RFP sit out there and see what we get as a response and evaluate it at that point and going forward from there.
John, I'll ask for your input, and then Bill, I want to come back to you for some thoughts.
Yeah, I'm happy with the direction we're going with the RFP. I do think Bill's brought some good ideas forward, but I think there is time to accommodate those on the present path we're on.
Thanks for that. Bill, so any comments on an amended RFP that includes that and broadens the net for the input that we're all looking for?
Thank you, I appreciate it. I think it's really difficult to combine the two effectively. And I don't say this to be obstructionist or contrarian. It's just they're two very different things that two very different groups of people would be responding to. How could a food hall operator provide financial quotes for doing architecture and engineering work in the next 2 weeks? I have no idea. I mean, that takes a lot of time and research to put together. So, I'm fine. I think the one thing I would ask you all to consider on top of this then, if we're going to proceed with the RFP, is to specifically request that staff bring the RFP results back to us rather than just bring a winning contract back to us, and make sure that we're having a conversation on what the RFP results were, what kind of people submitted bids, what it looks like, what next steps might be from there. Typically, we don't do that.
Right. I think there's an opportunity for us to get information. I don't think it should necessarily be presented in as city council as the selection committee, but I understand that you're saying that we'd want to know what the fruit of the RFP was. Is that possible to understand that?
Sure, we won't be able to share with you individual information on an RFP until a decision is made to award no contract or a recommendation for award is made, is my right? Is that correct for here? Yeah, I thought that's what the rule was here. I don't have it confused with the previous employer. So we won't be able to talk in specificity with you about what proposer A versus proposer B said. However, when once a notice of intent to proceed into contract negotiations is issued, we're able to discuss that a bit more freely. But that notice needs to be issued first under our procurement code, is what the city attorney is shaking his head yes to.
Is that because that's stipulated in the procurement code specifically?
The decision is through a process designated by the city manager. Because of how the process goes and how it comes to council later, it's designed to be separate so that the information from the city manager's determination and evaluation process is done independently of specific direction from council, who then reviews the contract.
So if I'll give you, like, the last time this was amended was before I got here, and it has to do with the old powerhouse. And I will tell you, I think that was not a successful process for this community when those proposals were coming before the council itself. And I am very cautious of how difficult that was for the community and putting the community through that again.
Okay, so I guess my last request would be, if we're going to continue with this RFP process, we should also get started on an RFQ, if that's the right term for it. It's what Jen referenced in her memo, I believe. An RFQ soliciting operating partners now. I don't see any risk of doing that simultaneously at this point. I don't think it's ultimately the best approach, but I think if we're going to continue with the RFP process, we should also be doing that.
Okay. Thank you. We'll come back to that, and we'll wrap with that for next steps. Let's get back to the questions that you were asking earlier. You wanted some ranking of use and programming?
Yeah, I thought the easy question would be, should we take the existing second story out of the building for any future use of the building?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I don't think anybody thinks that that works well. Ceiling heights, chopped windows. Yes, second floor.
You know, and again, not a priority, this could be looked at down the road, but I gave you kind of ballpark of what some remodel of the existing footprint of the building would be, and it falls within the somewhere in the middle price point of 18 to 23 million that council had looked at before. If you do add that addition, it will go beyond that price point. Do you want us to just initially look at the building footprint that's there now? And if that needs to change in the future, it can change based on partners, size, spacing needs, requirements, et cetera.
John?
Yeah, I just want to say I voted for middle of the road just because of the amount of money that's going to go into it and the other projects that we're working on right now. If an RFP bidder says we need that extra space to make it work, I'd be willing to look at that addition again. Yeah, I think it is another $7 to $8 million though, right?
Yeah, roughly we were looking at, it's 5.5 to, yeah, basic 6 to 8 million. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Bill?
Yeah, I don't think we should be spending our time right now on designing something we don't know what it's for.
But when it comes
Specific to the addition, yes.
when it comes to the addition, you are neither for nor against. You're open to the programming and the building design working together.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ward?
My initial response was no to the addition because of the time and money involved in putting the addition on. Plus, as Bill points out, we don't know what, if we decide what we want the building to do, what community services and it's going to deliver, then decide if we need it at that point, come back and look at it. But initially, I wouldn't, I didn't, and I don't believe adding to the building in the alley, number one, makes the Armory look any better. Number two, building it just because we can doesn't seem to make sense to me. Let's see what the need is and proceed from there.
Sam?
Yeah, for me, it also comes down to need and, like, I think it's a very business-oriented question to see what an operator and design says about it, because the space could pay for itself, the money could be negligible. This is a once-in-a-generation, as Bill said, project. The other thing I just wanted to consider, since it is parking spaces, is I think handicap parking and accessible parking should be considered when thinking about adding an addition there, since that would take away parking that's obviously right next to the building.
I'm open to it. I'm not against the addition. My gut feeling is that we kind of need the addition. I think that extra square footage is going to be what helps us to return to the community the uses that they want. So I'm open to it. Jen, your statement was that through the RFP process, what's delineated in the current RFP?
It was written with a little bit of flexibility that we'd be getting direction from this meeting. And I think what I'm hearing is currently we're looking at the existing footprint of the building, remove the second story, but depending on what the needs are for the building based on prioritization of uses, we could revisit that down the road. And that would be the message I would be providing. And that could be a change order to a contract down the road.
That makes sense.
Okay. Second story and addition, those two questions answered. Would you like to get on to ranking prioritization program?
Yeah, and I think this is obviously a little more difficult. You have a lot of people interested in this building. There's a lot of energy around this issue. And so our consultants have provided a couple of concepts showing how different uses can fit in the building. I think it's really important moving forward because we can look at additional what can fit and what will work best in the building to make it a successful building, is to really rank what uses should take precedent in the building. You could probably have a little bit of everything and it might not be a successful building, so I'm really interested in seeing and hearing what the ranking is for uses in the building.
Sounds good.
Or would it be easier to start with eliminating what you don't want?
And can we put up the slide with all the different options while we do that? I think that might be helpful.
Well, I can say this, if there's no food service in this building, then we missed. So obviously there is a food hall component, but I'll work backwards as well. Sure, go right ahead.
I was just going to suggest maybe I can start with some of the things that I don't think belong in here and explain why. If that's
yeah, sure.
agreeable to that. All right, great. ACRA offices, I just think do not belong in this building in any circumstances. There's other options for them, both in city buildings and elsewhere. It's not a high yield to the community or any yield to the community really from a public standpoint. Makes no sense to me. Large visitor center. To me, this comes back to this is a project for locals. It's something, of course, that we're happy to share with our visitors, but I don't know why we would prioritize our visitors in this location. This is a project that should be, I believe, something to meet our needs as locals first, and a 1,000 square foot visitor center does not meet my needs. I'm okay with a kiosk similar to that across from Paradise Bakery for ACRA as a visitor center, which I think functions very well. I'm also okay with something like that for the Forest Service if they can't be combined into one. But 1,000 square foot visitor center to me is not locals first. Formal co-working to me makes very little sense. There's several co-working type of businesses in Aspen right now. I think that this could be an informal type of co-working setup where, functioning like a coffee shop where you can have your laptop and do work with effectively no charge. But formal co-working I don't think is a business that we should be getting into here, and it seems like it's trying to meet a private need, not really a community need. And then formal gathering space, that one I have a difficult time with because I think it monopolizes a lot of space for very little, for low time utilization. And I think that we have an alternative great opportunity to do that in the old powerhouse, maybe even a superior opportunity to do that in the old powerhouse. So I just don't want to put too many program elements into this, like like Jen said, and make this unsuccessful. So I think we should focus on the most desired things, which are those I did not mention yet, but those are the ones that I'm opposed to.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to share input? Ward?
Yeah, I think the number one priority has been expressed in a number of ways as a food for lower price point. Whether that's a full-service restaurant, I don't know if that really fits in, but for food court or casual dining, that would be my number one. My number two is it kind of incorporates a community lounge and flex space where that if you had a food court, people could take their food to a table, they could conduct a small meeting, they could have, they could, as Bill said, you can sit there and do work while you have a meal or just get into a comfortable chair and space and do that in a flex space community lounge. I think that there's a need, a small need, not a whole floor, but a need for some affordable retail. I particularly like the artisan aspect, which would be like the artisans from the Saturday market, a place for with an emphasis on locally made. And I think my lowest priority is for the ACRA offices. I think that there should be some visitor center to some degree, but not, I don't think 1,000 square feet is needed for that. The co-working space, I don't see that has been a high request from the community, so that would be a low priority because I think that co-working space could be incorporated in the community lounge or the third space, flex space uses for the Armory.
Thanks, Ward. I'm going to go to Sam next and then John.
To everyone's point, food hall number one, and with the food hall, I sort of envisioned a bar concept, and I think one thing that was lost in this community recently was the pool table and shuffleboards at like Eric's. So like having a floor like that here again, along with like food vending and bar, I think would be incredible community space. After that, I wrote down, the community lounge and formal gathering space. I imagine an informal gathering space could turn into a formal gathering space pretty easily. I don't think those need to be, I think it should be informal to start, but it can be made formal if need be. Lower price point retail, to Ward's point, Saturday market vendors, I think would be an incredible asset to this building as well. And then I'm not opposed to the visitor center for the strict reason that I think it might bring in more people. This is local centric, but I also think volume will matter when it comes to the business operations of this place, and getting more people in here through the door, I think makes it better for everyone. I think our local affordable eateries here are volume based, and I think it will be very important that we have as many people coming through. And then after that, anything else I didn't say is not a priority to me unless there's space for it. But those are the priorities that I vocalize.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I'm going to side with the community. Obviously, a food hall and some low-cost retail space are desired. As far as community lounge, struggle with that a little bit. I've spent some time in some other community lounges around town. The Aspen Art Museum seems to be a place where you can go enjoy some coffee, do some co-working. Where else? Unravel. I see people there working on their laptops frequently. I'm not saying no, I'm just saying I think we have quite a few of those community lounges around town. Visitor center, after traveling around Europe, I think visitor center is important. Whether it needs to be in the Armory, I'm not sure. Same with ACRA offices. I think they should be downtown rather than down by the river. But whether we put them in the Armory or not, I'm not sure.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
And mine are kind of echoing the sentiments that you've heard up here. Obviously, food service. I feel the same as kind of as Sam mentioned it about flex community space as well as the lounge space. I somewhat envision that we're utilizing the basement for maybe food service. There's a certain amount of tables that are available down there, but I also see the third floor as both that flexible community space, community lounge, as well as the formal event space that's possible. I'd like to leave that top floor, or what I envision is that top floor would be utilized for those community gatherings, but it could also, in the interim, when those aren't happening, be utilized for less formal, even a place to perhaps take food from downstairs, upstairs, and the like. So I think that that flexible multipurpose space on the third floor can handle more than just delineation as formal event only. I do think that the visitor center and possible forest service is a great use at this location. But again, I don't want it to be the driving factor of the first floor, but I think that there's a great opportunity for presence there. And then fourth to that, I have the retail, sort of a market, if you will. I mean, I envision small kiosk type setups. You know, we've all been shared some renditions of balcony spaces, perhaps, from different examples that have been shared with us. Maybe there's an opportunity for that, where there's an open center and the first floor has some perimeter uses for retail and market. ACRA offices, I would love to find a way to continue to work with ACRA and honor our relationship with them to make sure that ACRA has some office space at affordable rate in a difficult community for affordable rates. And I do not see co-working space as being a priority in this. But I do agree with the idea of coffee shop type setup so that people can be doing work, can be having their informal meetings and the like. But I don't see it as a co-office space, if you will. How it's described here, rentable offices, desks, and meeting spaces. That I'd stick to informal meeting and tables and chairs. So you can scale that out on your point system that you're keeping for us, Jen. I do want to take this one opportunity because, you know, I think it's important that other members are represented. And I just want everybody to know that, you know, I think all of us have heard from folks that have advocated for housing at this very location. I think we should also recognize that there have some people that have advocated for some type of shelter, if you will, or you know, some part of this building being utilized for serving some of the underprivileged, perhaps. But I'm not sure that this is the location for that. It definitely is not what we've heard from a majority of our community, but I did want those voices to be at least heard. Bill.
I just want to elaborate a little bit on the uses that I do like. I agree with most of what was said here. I think where I'd want to expand, Jen, is that I think that most of the uses that we seem to be in consensus on agreeing with keeping are very complementary and really work together nicely. So, you know, retail, you know, especially sort of makers market retail and food hall are a perfect match and work really well together in many examples elsewhere, you know, whether it's home goods or, you know, arts and crafts type of stuff or locally produced clothing or whatever. Lots of that can work really nicely alongside a food hall. So to me, the definition of food hall, which is my number one priority, to be clear, certainly incorporates that type of retail. You know, community lounge, third space, community living room. This, if it's executed well, definitionally becomes a community lounge. You know, the pressure to come in and purchase an expensive dinner or a drink or anything at all sort of goes away when the seating is communal and the doors are open. It's not the same as walking into a private restaurant or a coffee shop. You know, it's much more welcoming to anyone, and whether you decide to purchase something or not is kind of up to you. You know, flexible multi-purpose spaces. I love Sam's idea of bringing back some of those game type of spaces. You know, flex space can work really well in there. I just don't want to see private enclosed meeting room, banquet room type of stuff. I think that again will be utilized a very small percentage of the time, and be dark the rest of the time. So as Tori mentioned, the spaces that can be used to dine in when there isn't an event going on, but could you somehow coordinate it off and do a gathering event type of thing? Absolutely open to that. Fitness classes, that kind of thing, not particularly interested in that, but something that jives with the idea of gatherings and meetings and food and beverage, totally supportive of. I think that touches on everything.
Thanks for clarification. Jen, do you have other questions?
No, I mean, I'm assuming that, I think you've all consistently said kind of the top uses you'd like to see, and it's a matter of developing a program that an operator is interested in and can check the boxes and make sure the ratios are right to make it as successful as possible. And we'll be coming back for that with any issues as we keep developing forward. You might have to make choices on proportions of uses in the building.
Council, and then you'll see a resolution on the 1128 agenda to affirm this direction. This is consistent about how we've been handling these facilities. So we have that to reference for ourselves as well as for the community and potential respondents.
Thank you. I had one more question for myself. I was wondering about the current schedule for the Armory building and what is its availability for temporary uses during the winter. Specifically, if there was the opportunity for utilizing even the basement level for a holiday market or something. I don't know, but I'm just wondering, is there opportunity for us to activate this space, or are we moving? I think the plan is to move things out of the powerhouse as planning goes forward for the Armory and the like. So I'm just wondering what our schedule is and if there's opportunity.
So we are coming back on the 27th to talk about the old powerhouse and its schedule, but if and when that gets remodeled, the time that we're looking at starting that project was summer of 2024, so 7 months away. And that will require removal of both ACRA and city offices that are there and move into, the plan is to move into the Armory temporarily. We also have on a discussion on the 27th about the Main Street cabin, which could entail additional relocation of city staff into that building. So you do have staff there now. You could potentially having more staff in there temporarily with the old powerhouse being remodeled. And so I think part of that discussion of can you put something in the uses, looking at where uses could happen and if it's just more of a special event, but I think that's just a discussion you need to have about what are you hoping to activate with that building.
All right. Anything else that we can help you with this evening as this moves forward? Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
Sarah or Scott? Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here this evening with us. We are back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Please come and join us for our regularly scheduled meeting.
Mike.
Thank you to GrassRoots.
Been there, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah. It's open like 36 days a year.
Oh, God, really?
Thank